Welcome, my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Please hype me on YouTube. Thanks. I've always believed in my instincts. Years in the courtroom taught me to trust them, or at least I thought I did. My name is Elliot Marsh, defense attorney, 28 years in New York City, a city that doesn't forgive hesitation or weakness. I've built a reputation on winning the impossible, cases that seemed destined for disaster, and somehow, I turned them into triumphs. I like to think it was skill. Sometimes, though, it was luck. It started on a rainy Thursday evening when the call came. My secretary's voice sounded tight, almost hesitant as she delivered the name, Harold Crane. The case was high profile, the kind that guaranteed press coverage, late-night debates, and endless speculation. Harold was accused of multiple murders, bizarre in their execution yet calculated, deliberate. Nothing about him screamed danger, at least, not at first glance. I met him in the holding room the next morning. Harold sat quietly, hands folded neatly on his lap, pale, thin-framed and impossibly calm. His eyes held an unassuming kindness, the sort of gaze that made you think of harmless accountants balancing numbers rather than cold-blooded killers. He smiled politely when I introduced myself. "Thank you for taking the case, Mr. Marsh," he said. His voice was quiet, precise, almost soothing. "I just want the truth to come out." I believed him. We started preparing for trial. At first, the files were routine. Witness statements, forensic reports, security footage. Everything that should have screamed guilt in the accused instead revealed inconsistencies, gaps that raised questions without providing answers. Harold's alibis were airtight on paper, yet something about the way each document was worded seemed off, as though someone had anticipated every doubt and crafted an answer in advance. Then the letters arrived. I found them on my desk first thing Monday morning. Crisp, white stationery, precise handwriting. "You're getting closer than you think," one read. Another, "Not everything is as it seems, Elliot. Look closer." The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, strangely familiar, and yet I couldn't place it. I assumed it was a prank. But the more notes appeared, the more their content unnerved me. They referenced cases I had handled years ago, small details no one should remember. I shook it off, blaming stress, city life, insomnia. The dream started next. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, only to find myself in courtrooms where Harold was always one step ahead. The prosecutor's questions twisted before they even left her lips. Witnesses contradicted themselves mid-sentence. And every time I realized I was the one who had led them there. My own mind became a hall of mirrors, reflecting not just the trial but a version of reality I couldn't trust. I ignored it at first. Defense attorneys don't indulge paranoia. We rely on facts, strategy, and preparation. But one evening, as I reviewed testimony transcripts, a pattern emerged. Every time I suggested a line of defense, Harold's responses seemed premeditated, almost rehearsed. Not rehearsed as in coached by me, but rehearsed as if he'd anticipated my defense before I even conceived it. It was subtle, nothing concrete, but the realization made the air in the office feel heavier. I started doubting my judgment. A nagging thought gnawed at me. What if I was too confident, too trusting, too willing to see a man's innocence because I wanted to believe in it? My colleagues noticed. "You're obsessed," said Clara, my assistant, one evening. "Step back before you burn out." I waved her off, telling myself she didn't understand. And yet, Harold's calm remained. The courtroom is an ecosystem of tension. It's not just law and argument, it's anticipation, body language, psychological warfare. I had been on both sides long enough to know when a defendant was nervous. Harold wasn't. Not even a flinch when cross-examined. Not a twitch when confronted with evidence. Every move was deliberate. I began noticing details I had dismissed before. The way Harold's eyes flicked toward the jury before responding, the subtle shake of his hands when he feigned surprise, the timing of his pauses just long enough for me to feel confident that I had a window to argue, but never long enough to catch him off guard. He was teaching me a lesson in manipulation without speaking a word. Then the letters became more specific. They referenced witnesses by name, suggesting lines of questioning I hadn't considered. "Watch the girl from apartment 3B, one read. She won't lie, but she won't tell everything either. I tried to dismiss it as coincidence, but the next day during preparation I realized the note was correct. It was eerily accurate. I confronted Harold in my office, stomach twisting. He smiled faintly, differently. "You have to tell me something," I said, my voice steady but I've told you everything, Elliot. You just need to understand. That night, I barely slept. I could hear the rain against the window, rhythmic and relentless, and I realized I was thinking about Harold constantly. Every moment of the trial, every piece of evidence, every witness deposition, it all seemed manipulated. The lines between defense and complicity blurred. Had I been guiding the jury's perception according to his plan without realizing it? By the fourth week, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I started researching Harold's past, cross-referencing old cases, combing through his personal history. Nothing incriminated him. Nothing exonerated him either. And the strangest part? He anticipated my every move. When I thought I had discovered a gap in his story, he had already accounted for it, with the perfect explanation, the perfect alibi, the perfect calm. The courtroom became more than a trial. It became a chessboard. Every objection I raised, every witness I questioned, seemed to play directly into Harold's hands. My confidence eroded. Doubt crept into my mind, not just professionally but personally. I was being outmaneuvered in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The breaking point came during testimony from Detective Malone. She presented a timeline that contradicted Harold's alibi, something I thought would unmask him. But Harold responded with a calmness that defied reality. "Detective, I understand your timeline," he said, voice smooth. "But the timestamps on the security cameras in the lobby prove otherwise." He had anticipated her investigation. Every question, every detail, it was rehearsed, engineered. I started noticing subtle cues in myself. My dreams were no longer restful. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, replaying every court interaction, imagining ways I might have inadvertently aided him. One night, I caught myself drafting strategies not to defend him, but to anticipate what he wanted me to do next. I realized then I wasn't just defending him. I was performing according to his design. I mentioned it to my colleague, Dr. Feldman, over coffee. "You?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded reluctantly, not sure I'm even in control anymore. Feldman leaned back. Smartest people are the easiest to fool. "You think Harold is manipulating, he's orchestrating everything. Be careful, Elliot. Sometimes By the fifth week, the courtroom was tense enough to choke on. Reporters lined the back, cameras clicking, microphones jostling. The jury sat, attentive, unaware that their perceptions were being guided, shaped, and controlled, not by the law, but by Harold's meticulous planning. During closing arguments, I realized the horrifying truth. Every strategy I had implemented, every legal maneuver, had been anticipated. Every witness I protected, every piece of evidence I minimized, it had been used exactly as Harold intended. I had become an unwitting accomplice. The magnitude of it hit me like a fist to the chest. The final day, I sat in my chair, heart hammering. Harold's calm smile never wavered. The judge's gavel fell and the verdict came. Not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Journalists shouted, cameras flashed. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I understood fully, chillingly, that Harold had orchestrated the entire scenario. Not just the murders, but the trial, the public perception, my very actions. I had been a puppet in a game too large, too precise to comprehend fully. After the trial, I walked out into the cold New York evening. Rain soaked my coat, but I barely noticed. People congratulated me, shaking my hand, praising my brilliance, unaware that my own brilliance had been turned against me. I thought of the victims, the lives destroyed, and of Harold, smiling quietly somewhere, untouchable. I knew something had shifted inside me. My instincts, once my greatest weapon, had been weaponized against me. I had learned painfully that confidence without vigilance can be dangerous. Even the smartest, most careful among us can be manipulated if we let ourselves believe in appearances over truth. It took months before I could sleep without nightmares. I double-checked every door, every lock, every detail in my life. I carried the lesson in my bones. Intelligence alone is no safeguard against deception, and trust, while valuable, must be measured carefully. The courtroom had been a masterclass in manipulation, but the real lesson wasn't legal. It was moral. Evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides behind a calm demeanor, a polite smile, or a neatly folded alibi. And sometimes the greatest crime isn't the one committed with violence, but the one committed in plain sight, with the unwitting help of those who believed they were doing right. Appearances can deceive even the most skilled. Vigilance, humility, and critical reflection are essential, for intelligence without careful scrutiny can be a pathway to complicity and wrongdoing. I've always believed in the power of truth. As a journalist, it wasn't enough to skim the surface or settle for the official story. I dug, I probed, and I exposed the dark corners most people didn't want to see. I specialized in online harassment, stories of women targeted, threatened, their lives invaded in the digital shadows. I thought I knew the signs, the patterns, the psychology behind it. I believed I was immune to the same dangers because I was careful. I kept my routines rigid, my movements public yet calculated, my personal life opaque. But everything changed when I started investigating the attacks on a cluster of young women in my city. It began with the emails, anonymous, unsettling, detailing information that wasn't public. At first, I thought it was another cyber harassment victim trying to reach me, maybe someone panicked or seeking guidance. The images attached were grainy but precise, photos of streets I walked every day, angles that matched the route I took from my apartment to the subway. I brushed it off, convincing myself someone was copying my movements, someone clever, but not dangerous. Then the pattern started to feel impossible. I noticed a car parked outside my building repeatedly at different times of the day. A man crossing the street would appear at the same moment I left the coffee shop, then disappear when I changed direction. I chalked it up to coincidence, but the unease settled deep in my chest, an itch that refused to leave. I began keeping logs, documenting every anomaly, convinced I was onto a stalker. At work, my colleagues noticed my distraction. "Maya, you've been jumpy," said Simon, my editor, the morning after I spent 3 hours tracking a suspicious black SUV. "Is it part of the story?" I nodded, hiding the fear I couldn't explain. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's closer than I thought." At night, I pored over the harassment cases, comparing details, looking for patterns. I reviewed photos, timestamps, IP addresses, social media footprints. But the deeper I delved, the more unnerving it became. Some elements seemed familiar, almost too familiar. I pushed the thought aside, attributing it to intuition sharpening with experience. Then came the messages, specific, intimate, chilling in their precision. They included my routines, my favorite cafes, even the book I left on the counter at the corner coffee shop. Whoever was sending them wasn't just watching me, they knew me. I felt the walls close in, paranoia creeping into every decision. Which streets I walked, which routes I took, who I allowed to know my schedule. One night, I stayed at my office past midnight, reviewing photos of a girl who had been targeted online. The images in my inbox suddenly matched locations she frequented. I realized with a cold jolt that the pattern was replicating my own daily life. I froze. Could someone be mirroring me? Studying me the way I studied others? I began seeing myself everywhere, in reflections, in the background of surveillance feeds, in the eyes of strangers. Every step felt anticipated. I called the police once, reporting suspicious activity outside my building, but the officers found nothing. It was as if the city itself had become a mirror, reflecting my fear back at me. The more I pursued the story, the more the line between observer and observed blurred. I started carrying 2 phones, using burner apps, even checking the locks on my office doors 3 times before leaving. Friends asked why I was distant, why I seemed drained. I lied, saying the story was getting to me, that digging through harassment cases was emotionally exhausting. Deep down, though, a gnawing thought refused to leave. The stalker wasn't outside. It might be inside me. The revelation came in fragments. One evening, while cross-referencing social media posts and timestamps, I noticed a detail I couldn't reconcile. A photo supposedly taken of one of the harassment victims had been captured from an angle only I could have achieved. My chest tightened. Could it be me? I didn't want to admit it. The thought was preposterous. I was the investigator, the truth seeker. I wasn't capable of the crimes I was documenting. And yet, as I reviewed more cases, a pattern emerged. The timing, the proximity, the choice of targets, they all traced back to locations I frequented, familiar routes I knew intimately. My mind spun. Memories from my teenage years began surfacing, fleeting, fragmentary moments I had buried, an incident with a peer, an obsessive fixation, a sense of power and control I had pushed deep into my subconscious. The more I pieced together, the more horrifying it became. The attacks, the images, the messages, they weren't from a stranger. They were from me. My own suppressed memories had manifested in a dissociative way, creating a cycle of obsession and projection. I was both perpetrator and investigator, hunter and hunted, observer and observed. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly. I isolated myself, checking mirrors obsessively, avoiding cameras, terrified of what I might see. I couldn't confront anyone, not Simon, not my friends, not even myself. The final confrontation came the night I tried to retrace my steps in the city. I followed my own routines, hoping to find evidence, hoping to prove it wasn't me. But everywhere I turned, the same eerie coincidences appeared. Shadows, reflections, familiar streets, and the inescapable feeling of being watched. I began leaving messages to myself, warnings I didn't recognize as my own handwriting, reminders of times I had crossed moral lines. I realized, in a slow, crushing clarity, that I had been projecting my guilt outward, attributing to external stalkers what my own mind had done. Every case I pursued, every investigation I conducted into online harassment, had been a reflection of my own suppressed impulses. I wasn't exposing criminals, I was exposing myself. In the moments of lucid clarity that came sporadically, I questioned reality entirely. Had any of the stalking incidents been real? Had any of the messages been sent by anyone but me? I felt as though I were trapped in an endless loop of perception and memory, unable to trust sight, sound, or thought. By the end, my life unraveled. My credibility as a journalist evaporated. The colleagues I trusted, the sources I relied on, even the legal authorities, none could distinguish between fact and projection. I was exposed to myself, and that exposure was more devastating than any external scrutiny. I had become both the hunter and the hunted, the victim and the perpetrator, the observer and the observed. Every investigation I'd conducted, every article I'd written, every story of harassment I had revealed, the irony was inescapable. I was the embodiment of the phenomenon I had spent years fighting. I now moved through my days with a fragmented sense of identity, cautious of my own impulses, haunted by memories both real and imagined. I can't erase the past, and I can't fully trust my own mind. The city feels like a mirror, reflecting every suppressed thought and every moral compromise I've ever made. Self-awareness is not always enough to prevent harm. Our unconscious actions, suppressed impulses, and unacknowledged traumas can manifest in ways that distort reality, harm others, and erode our moral foundation. True responsibility requires constant reflection, confronting uncomfortable truths, and recognizing that the line between observer and participant is thinner than we often believe. I always thought Burlington was the kind of town where nothing bad could happen. Leafy streets, small brick cafes, bike paths along the river. It felt safe, familiar, predictable. Maybe that's why I moved here, escaping the mess of my past relationship, hoping for a clean slate. My name is Hannah Reed, 26, a digital marketing specialist who loved spreadsheets, quiet nights, and living alone in a loft that used to be a warehouse. The space had tall ceilings, exposed beams, and large windows that let the sun flood in during the mornings. I liked that about it. It made me feel grounded, safe. But the thing is, safety is a fragile illusion. I learned that the hard way. My previous relationship had ended badly, not violently, but the harassment after was constant. Messages in the middle of the night, someone lingering outside my apartment, knowing details about my schedule that I had never shared. It left me cautious, hyper-aware. I developed habits, checking locks 3 times, noticing every unfamiliar face on the street, keeping my phone within reach at all times. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Weeks before everything started happening, there were tiny signs, tiny enough that anyone might dismiss them as coincidence. At first, it was a flickering light across the street, in the apartment that faced my loft. Then a package, slightly nudged out of place. A man walking past late at night, hood up, pausing at my building, just standing there, looking. At first I told myself it was nothing, my mind playing tricks. But there's a difference between imagination and instinct. Something about him felt deliberate enough to make my chest tighten whenever I saw him. The first real alarm came one evening after a late night at work. I unlocked my loft door, tired and distracted, and noticed a folded piece of paper slipped under it. My name was written on it, careful, precise. "You're predictable, Hannah. Always the same routine." My hand trembled as I picked it up. My mind raced. How could anyone know? The grocery runs I'd made that week, the therapy session I hadn't mentioned to anyone, the route I walked home from work. It all had been noted, cataloged. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. Someone was studying me, shaping themselves into my life. I told a friend, Julia, everything that night over the phone. She listened, calm, methodical, the voice I needed when my own thoughts were scrambling. "You need to take it seriously," she said. "Lock every door, every window. Change your routines. Document everything." That's what I did. I started taking pictures of the hall outside, recording timestamps of deliveries, marking oddities in a small notebook I kept on my desk. I installed extra locks, motion lights, even a small camera facing my doorway. I wanted evidence. I wanted proof that someone was there. And that's when I started noticing Ethan. He lived across the street, quiet, polite, always nodding as I left for work or came home. I never thought much of him until patterns emerged. The hooded figure, the small disturbances, the uncanny timing. They always seemed to align with when Ethan's blinds were open just a little wider than usual, or when I caught a glimpse of him lingering near the window. The unease settled like a stone in my stomach. I wasn't just imagining it. Someone was there, watching. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every small detail from the past few weeks. I felt exposed, vulnerable, a target in plain sight. I realized my past trauma had given me skills, awareness, a sixth sense, but it hadn't made me invincible. I didn't know who was out there, and I didn't know why they had chosen me. All I knew was that the illusion of safety was gone, and with it, the quiet rhythm of my life had shattered. It started small, almost laughably small, and that made it worse. My coffee mug moved a few inches on the counter. A stack of mail fell to the floor in the middle of the night, though I'd left it perfectly stacked. At first, I told myself I was being neurotic. Maybe I'd knocked things over and forgotten. But then, the next day, I found faint scratches along my hallway wall, deliberate, almost artistic in their placement. I tried to convince myself it was paint scraping against furniture, an accident, but deep down I knew. Someone had been inside. I started leaving small marks of my own, tracing chalk lines along doors and windows, trying to see if they moved overnight. They did. Furniture shifted slightly. Packages untouched before were now on the floor. The creeping realization, I was being watched, yes. But this wasn't random. This was methodical. Someone wanted me to feel unsafe. I called Julia over one evening, hoping to make sense of it. "Hannah," she said, leaning against my kitchen counter, "someone is playing games with you. You need to accept that. Don't go it alone." I nodded, grateful for her presence, but inside, panic still churned. That night I saw him, or maybe I imagined him through my window. A figure, hood up, standing at the edge of the street. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. I became hyper-aware of every sound. Footsteps, the scrape of a tire on the road, even the wind brushing the leaves outside. I started documenting everything, each oddity noted in my notebook, each photograph saved on my laptop. I changed my routines, walked home different ways, took cabs instead of biking, even pretended to go out when I stayed in. Nothing mattered. The feeling never left. Ethan, the neighbor, became more prominent in my mind. He was always around, polite, smiling, but too polished, too deliberate. I noticed small details. How he sometimes lingered by his window when I returned. How his car seemed to appear in odd spots. I caught him once staring just long enough for me to feel his gaze like a physical weight. But when I tried to confront him indirectly, smiling, waving, he acted casual, perfectly normal, but I wasn't fooled. One night, I installed a small camera across the street, hidden in plain sight, hoping for proof. The footage revealed nothing. Ethan's building remained empty during the times of the disturbances. No figure, no shadow, nothing. And yet, my apartment betrayed me. The scratches, the moved items, the misplaced mail. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped between reality and paranoia, knowing instinctively something was wrong but unable to pinpoint it. Julia came back the next morning. "Hannah," she said, tone serious, "this isn't just a stalker problem, it's psychological. Someone wants you scared. That's power. They don't need to hurt you physically to control you." I nodded, silently shaking. That night, I lay in bed, staring at my ceiling, listening to every creak, every hum. Someone had entered my life, infiltrated my routine, and the worst part? I didn't know if I'd ever see them, or if I'd see them at all. The pranks escalated. One morning I found my apartment door slightly ajar. I hadn't left it unlocked. My heart pounded as I inspected the rooms. Nothing was missing, but the drawers had been rifled, books opened to random pages. Someone was in my space, someone who knew me intimately. I considered calling the police, but there was no evidence, nothing concrete. I felt helpless. Ethan's presence intensified. I would see him walking slowly past the building, always at the same time I returned from work. Once he was sitting on a bench across the street pretending to read, but his gaze followed me as I climbed the stairs to my loft. I started photographing him discreetly, hoping to catch his behavior, to document patterns. Every time I tried to confront him indirectly, through casual conversation or nodding hello, he was polite, almost charming. But the instinct in my gut screamed, he was involved. I tried traps, motion sensors, small alarms on doors, even leaving objects in odd places to see if they moved. And they did. Every time. My life became a routine of avoidance, observation, and strategy. I questioned my sanity constantly. Was I imagining all of this? Was my mind replaying old trauma? But the subtle, deliberate disruptions didn't lie. Someone had access. Someone was orchestrating my fear. One evening, I decided to confront Ethan. I stepped out onto the street, calling his name lightly, hoping for some acknowledgement. The apartment across from mine was dark, empty, no movement. I checked the doors, the windows, every entrance. Nothing. And yet, when I returned to my loft and reviewed the photographs I had taken, there he was, faintly reflected in the glass, smiling. I froze, staring at the image. The ambiguity was unbearable. Was he real? Was my trauma twisting into paranoia? My body ached with exhaustion, my mind a mess of fear and doubt. I realized that even if I confronted him directly, I might never understand the truth. The only certainty was the unease that had seeped into every corner of my life. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the building, every car outside, every shadow under the streetlight triggered panic. I rearranged my loft multiple times, installed extra locks, stayed alert even during the day. Julia's words echoed. Fear is power. He doesn't need to hurt you physically. He already controls your mind. I started documenting every instance, hoping patterns would emerge, hoping to regain control. Packages moved, mail scattered, minor changes to furniture, all calculated. I wondered if Ethan was just the mask of the intruder, a convenient projection of my fears. But the reflected image, the subtle figure in the photograph, gnawed at my rationality. I couldn't escape the idea that someone, somewhere, was orchestrating my life, watching every move. The line between paranoia and reality blurred. I caught myself checking mirrors reflexively, scanning reflections in glass, in the coffee shop, even the darkened windows across the street. Ethan's politeness, his every smile, became a taunt. I questioned everyone, every passerby, every shadow. I realized I could trust no one completely, not even myself. The culmination arrived without fanfare. A night alone in the loft, empty streets outside, the wind rustling leaves. I sat by my window, reviewing photographs from the past weeks. Nothing concrete. But then, faintly, in the reflection of my balcony glass, I saw him, Ethan, smiling. Not in the street, not in his apartment, but there, present in my life without physically being there. I understood then that the terror wasn't just physical, it was psychological. He had seeped into my reality. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and sat in silence, exhausted. My body and mind screamed for rest, but the image lingered, a reminder that some threats don't announce themselves. Some predators exist in ambiguity, in the uncertainty that keeps you awake at night, scanning shadows, questioning reality. Weeks later, life returned to a fragile normal. I moved my routines, made changes, remained vigilant. But the reflection, that smile, stayed with me, a lesson etched into my mind. Some dangers are unseen. Some fears persist not because of what happens to you physically, but because someone or something forces your mind to never settle. Awareness and caution are vital, but fear is also a tool. True safety comes from understanding your boundaries, trusting your instincts, and maintaining vigilance while protecting your mental well-being. Some threats cannot be fully controlled, but preparation, awareness, and resilience give us the power to endure, adapt, and reclaim a sense of security, even in the face of ambiguity. I always believed the only danger in my life was the one I wrote about. My name is David Kane, crime novelist, and for 20 years, my worlds of meticulously plotted murders, alibis, and betrayals lived safely on the page. My fans devoured the stories, journalists praised my gritty realism, and I carried on my life in the quiet apartment I had inherited from my father, nestled in a side street of Boston. That life was orderly, controlled, until the letters started arriving. It was a rainy Tuesday morning. I found the envelope slipped under my apartment door. No stamp, no return address, Just my name written in black ink that slanted slightly, unevenly, as if the hand behind it wasn't used to patience. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You write about murders. I live them," it read. At first I laughed. A fan with a dark sense of humor, I assumed. But the next letter was more specific. It described a murder that mirrored the plot of my latest novel, even referencing a character whose name I just mentioned in an interview. I felt a shiver, but I shrugged it off. Coincidences happen. By the third letter, paranoia had begun. The notes started describing real people, neighbors, coworkers, even my agent. Someone was watching me. Each description was precise, almost intimate, yet just enough ambiguity remained to make me question my own memory. I found myself double-checking locks, peering down empty streets at night, wondering who might be lurking in the shadows. I tried to involve the police. Detective Reyes was polite, but skeptical. "You're a writer," she said. "People write you weird letters all the time. Doesn't mean anyone's acting on them." I wanted to argue, to insist that the details went beyond imagination, but without proof, there was nothing to do. The letters had no fingerprints, no postmark, no digital trace. Sleep became impossible. I started keeping a notebook, writing down every detail from the letters, trying to track patterns. That's when I noticed a chilling coincidence. The crimes described were happening shortly after each novel was published. Someone was reading my work and using it as a blueprint. But why? And then the letters became personal. One arrived describing my morning routine, the coffee I drank, the street I walked down, the neighbor who waved at me. The handwriting was familiar now, as if I had seen it long ago, but I couldn't place it. Every nerve in my body told me this was more than admiration or obsession. Someone was inside my life, and I didn't know how. I began retracing my past. My apartment, my routines, even my friends. Nothing seemed safe anymore. I couldn't tell who I could trust. Everyone felt like a potential spy, a possible observer reporting back to whoever was doing this. The letters became almost conversational, taunting me, pushing me toward exhaustion. Late one night, a letter arrived that froze me in place. It described an argument I had had with my editor just a week before, word for word, almost verbatim. There was no way the writer could have known that. I was no longer being watched from afar. They were in my life, maybe closer than I realized. I dug into old family records. My parents had died years ago, leaving me only with memories and my twin brother Marcus, or at least I thought he was gone. He had disappeared after a violent argument in our teens, leaving nothing but a single letter that vanished before I could open it. The idea was ridiculous, yet something inside me whispered that the letter's handwriting bore resemblance to his. Tiny, almost imperceptible curves that only a family member would recognize. I called a private investigator. Carter, a former Boston PD officer, was intrigued. "You want to know if your brother's involved?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes. I need to know if it's him. If not him, someone is playing a very elaborate game." Carter started digging into Marcus's last known whereabouts, phone records, and any legal documents that might lead us to him. Weeks passed. The letters didn't stop. They became increasingly brazen, almost casual, describing things only Marcus would know. Arguments we'd had, secrets from our childhood, even the exact location where I kept my father's old files. And then it hit me. Marcus wasn't just sending letters. He was framing me. Every crime described in the notes, every death, every detail mirrored my book so closely that suspicion naturally fell on me. If anyone followed the breadcrumbs, it looked like I was orchestrating the killings, crafting alibis, and committing murders I hadn't even imagined in real life. Paranoia became a constant companion. I stopped answering my phone, avoided my usual cafes, and rarely left the apartment. Carter tried to reassure me. "We'll find him," he said, but I could see the worry in his eyes. "He's smart, David. Smarter than you think." He planned for this long before you even realized it. I started noticing small signs that I wasn't alone. The faint scent of cologne in my hallway that wasn't mine, misplaced books, my laptop slightly angled differently than I left it. Marcus was methodical, careful. He didn't want me dead. He wanted my life, my identity, the world I had built. He was rewriting my story, putting me in the role of villain while he assumed the part of the quiet twin who had disappeared. Then came the encounter. I was walking along the Charles River at night when I felt eyes on me. Someone stepped out of the shadows. Marcus. His grin was familiar, unsettling. "Surprised to see me?" he said casually, like meeting an old friend, not a twin who had been orchestrating my downfall. His voice held the same arrogance I remembered, the same sense of control. "You've been framing me," I said, my voice shaking. "Every crime, every letter, it's been you." Marcus shrugged, calm, collected. "I had to make you feel it, David. I had to show you what it's like to be powerless. You have my life now, but soon, people will believe it's yours." I realized then that everything I thought was safe, my routines, my writing, even my reputation, was a lie. Marcus had meticulously studied me for years, learning my habits, my friends, my secrets, until he could slip seamlessly into my life if I vanished. The final confrontation wasn't dramatic. No car chases, no gunfire, just quiet observation, strategy, and mental fortitude. I met Marcus in my apartment, every lock checked, every window secured. Carter was outside, radio in hand, ready to intervene if needed. Marcus smiled, almost pitying me. "You always were the careful one," he said, "but careful isn't enough." We argued, shouted, and traded truths and lies, and through it all I realized something fundamental. He knew me better than anyone, even better than myself. He knew my fears, my instincts, my weaknesses. I had underestimated him for years, but I also realized his arrogance was his undoing. His letters, his meticulous planning, they were predictable in their perfection. I traced his digital footprint, matched handwriting from old letters, and discovered locations he had visited repeatedly. Carter and I set a trap. When Marcus returned the next night, expecting the apartment empty and me isolated, the police moved in. He fought, resisted, but his overconfidence betrayed him. By the end, Marcus was in custody, his plan unraveling because he believed he could outthink everyone, including his own twin. In the aftermath, my life felt hollow yet intact. The letters stopped. The threat vanished, but the paranoia lingered. I realized how easily identity could be manipulated, how close reality and fiction could become when someone knew you intimately. I returned to writing, but differently now, more cautious, more self-aware, aware that even the most familiar faces can harbor unimaginable threats. I visited my father's grave one rainy morning, thinking about Marcus and the years lost to his manipulation. I wondered if he would ever change, ever understand the pain he caused. I understood, too, that control is an illusion. Plans, intelligence, even instinct can be exploited by someone willing to study you, wait patiently, and strike at the perfect moment. Knowledge of the world is powerful, but understanding human nature is essential. Trust must be measured, vigilance constant, and the assumption that someone knows you better than yourself can be both a warning and a guide. Even the closest bonds can be twisted, and survival depends on awareness, caution, and the humility to recognize your own blind spots. I had always been careful, hyper-aware. Growing up in a small New England town, my father drilled rules into me about strangers, caution, and personal boundaries. My older brother, ever protective, reinforced it, and my past experience with a stalker in college made me almost obsessive about security. Locks on doors, cameras, small alarms strategically placed throughout my apartment. Most people thought I was paranoid. Maybe I was. But every incident in my past had taught me that vigilance could mean the difference between safety and catastrophe. It was July 15th, 2019, when my life started tilting into unease. Portsmouth in the summer is usually quiet, calm even, with its coastal breeze and small harbors. My apartment overlooked a modest parking lot, and beyond it, the harbor glimmered in late afternoon sun. I liked my routines: work at the studio, coffee on the balcony, quiet evenings sketching or editing designs. But that evening, as I returned from work, I noticed a moving truck in the parking lot, unloading a new neighbor across the hall. He introduced himself almost immediately. Nathan Graves, mid-30s, polite, perfectly dressed, and unnervingly observant. He complimented my choice of plant on the balcony, made casual remarks about the weather, and somehow knew when I'd returned from work without me saying a word. I smiled politely, thinking, just a coincidence. The next few days, his presence seemed to shadow me. He'd greet me in the stairwell, casually mention errands I'd taken, even comment on the coffee I was drinking. Odd, but maybe just friendly, I told myself. Yet there was something in his eyes, quickly suppressed, calculating, that made my pulse quicken. I shrugged it off as nerves. But then the little things started happening. My mail disappeared briefly. My cat went missing for hours. One evening I thought I saw a shadow moving outside my window, just beyond the reflection of the balcony light. My chest tightened. Memories of my previous stalker flashed in my mind, how quickly obsession could escalate, how subtle behaviors could turn invasive. I started keeping a detailed log, photographing everything unusual, making mental notes of patterns. Nathan's appearances grew more unnerving. He was always in the right place at the right time, as if anticipating my moves. He complimented the same outfits, asked questions about my routine, smiled when I hesitated. I tried rationalizing it. He could just be friendly, socially astute, even lonely. But instinct screamed otherwise. I started locking doors preemptively, checking windows obsessively, and moving the camera angles. The apartment that had always felt safe now felt surveilled, almost claustrophobic. Nathan had crossed the threshold of casual neighborly interaction into the ambiguous, the threatening, the unknown. By the third week, I was on edge. My friends noticed my tension. My brother called daily to check in, and I avoided going out at night. Yet every precaution seemed insufficient. Nathan had a way of appearing anywhere without seeming suspicious, catching me at the elevator, outside the mailbox, even near the coffee shop across the street. He asked subtle questions about my apartment, the layout, even my work schedule. It wasn't overtly menacing, but the calculated timing and his uncanny knowledge made my stomach twist. One evening, I confronted him directly in the hall, trying to keep my voice calm. "You seem to know a lot about me," I said. He chuckled softly, sinister, I assure you. "I guess I just notice things. You have habits, routines, patterns." Nothing I wanted to believe him, but the memory of that shadowy figure outside my window returned with force. He smiled, but for a fraction of a second, it flickered cold, too cold to be innocent. I walked away, feeling watched, mentally rehearsing ways to protect myself if he decided to cross a line. At night, I pored over my logs, notes of his appearances, small observations, odd coincidences. I realized that the frequency of these events was not random. He was consistent, calculated. He was always where I least expected but most feared. My paranoia grew, and yet I couldn't dismiss the possibility that I was overreacting, letting past trauma color every interaction. The anxiety became almost tangible. I stopped going out alone. I checked my doors multiple times before bed. My cat rarely left my side. And yet, Nathan's presence lingered, intangible but suffocating. It was during a weekend evening, a few weeks later, that I noticed the key, hidden beneath a small flower pot just outside my door. My heart skipped. I had never hidden a spare key there, and yet there it was, perfectly positioned. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand, cold sweat gathering at my temples. Whoever had left it had access to my apartment. The implications made my mind race. Nathan, another stranger, my own anxiety playing tricks. That night, I sat awake, door locked, windows latched, cat curled tightly against me. At around 2 a.m., a soft tapping on the window jolted me upright. My heart raced, and there he was. Nathan, standing on the balcony across from mine, smiling directly at me. Not a friendly smile, not casual, but calculated, observant, waiting. I reached for my phone, dialed 911. My voice shook as I explained the situation. By the time the police arrived, he had vanished into the shadows. They were sympathetic but dismissive. There was no concrete evidence, no security footage capturing him. My documentation, my careful logs, were still insufficient. My reality, my fear, felt both validated and dismissed simultaneously. I began questioning my own sanity. Every moment, every encounter replayed endlessly in my mind. Was I exaggerating? Was it my trauma magnifying coincidences into threats? Yet nothing could explain the key, the balcony, the timing. Nathan was either a master manipulator or I was losing grip on reality. I started considering moving, though the thought of uprooting my life felt both freeing and terrifying. I couldn't leave, but I couldn't stay. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind against the window felt like a signal. I became hyper-vigilant, watching every reflection, every doorway. On my final night in the apartment, I packed quietly, the storm of my anxiety still raging. My logs and photos, meticulously collected, sat in a box. As I boarded the train, leaving Portsmouth behind, I finally allowed myself a moment of relief. Maybe closure, maybe escape. But then across the street, perfectly aligned with the departing train, I saw him. Nathan, smiling, calm, charming, observing. My chest tightened. All I could feel was the chilling realization that, whether real or a product of my mind, the danger or the uncertainty had followed me. I couldn't know for sure. Was he truly a psychopath manipulating my life, or had my past trauma distorted reality? The ambiguity lingered. Some threats are unseen, some shadows never leave. Fear can protect, but it can also distort. Trauma and hypervigilance can blur the line between reality and imagination, and sometimes the greatest danger is not knowing whether it lies outside us or within. Awareness must be tempered with reflection. Vigilance without clarity can imprison the mind as effectively as any external threat. Photography had always been my escape. I'm Leo Marks, a street photographer who thrives on the unpredictable, fleeting moments that pass unnoticed by the world. There's a rhythm to the city streets at night, the way neon reflections bounce off wet asphalt, the hurried shuffle of pedestrians lost in their own universes, the sudden laugh of someone who shouldn't exist in the shadows. I chased those moments, and for years it felt like I was capturing life itself, honest and unfiltered. It began one night after a long shoot near the South Side. I'd been wandering alleys and train yards, snapping anything that caught my eye. When I developed the roles in my darkroom, I noticed him, a stranger who seemed to appear in the background of almost every shot, always partially obscured, lurking in shadows, observing. I dismissed it at first. Street photography is full of strangers. People cross paths, sometimes at exactly the right or wrong moment. But then I saw him again more clearly, in another roll shot weeks later. Same posture, same expressionless stare, always just beyond the focus. My chest tightened. Something about the way he existed in my frame wasn't random. He wasn't blending in. He was waiting, deliberate, like a constant echo in my peripheral vision. I began reviewing every photo I'd taken over the last few months, scrolling through my digital archives late into the night. At first it was subtle, a shadow behind a coffee shop patron, a hooded figure near the corner of a street. Then the pattern became undeniable. He wasn't in every shot, but he was in too many for coincidence. The obsession took hold. I started taking night walks with my camera, hoping to catch him in the act. Sometimes I would feel him in the corner of my eye, only to turn and find empty alleyways, trash bins rattling in the wind. But then I caught movement on a rooftop across from an abandoned warehouse. He was there, perfectly still, watching. I tried calling out, my voice cracking, but no sound reached him. The more I chased him, the more I felt a shift in my instincts. I wasn't just curious anymore, I was afraid. My instincts told me he wasn't targeting me, at least not directly, but I couldn't shake the sense that my camera, my passion, had somehow drawn him into my orbit, that each shutter click invited him closer. That night I took dozens of photos, each one blurring into the next, capturing only fleeting glimpses of someone who seemed to know my next move before I made it. Days passed. I stopped sleeping properly, haunted by the photos I couldn't stop analyzing. And then I noticed something worse. The stranger wasn't simply appearing in my frames. He was capturing moments I hadn't seen yet, moments that hinted at danger for the people I knew. A friend walking home alone. A neighbor standing by a dimly lit street corner. Even my own reflection in a cafe window, distorted and anxious. I confided in Claire, a fellow photographer and the only person I trusted in this city. She listened patiently as I described the man, my obsession, and the growing unease that gripped me. "Leo," she said, "you're letting fear shape what you see. Maybe it's your mind playing tricks." But her eyes held doubt, the same doubt I was starting to feel creeping into myself. That night I went out again. I felt compelled, unable to resist the urge to follow him. The street smelled of rain and asphalt. Every shadow seemed to pulse with his presence. I spotted him moving between rooftops, disappearing into the maze of back alleys I knew like my own apartment. I tried to keep a safe distance, shooting from behind corners and parked cars. But the stranger wasn't hiding from me. He moved purposefully, almost methodically, as if guiding me to something I didn't yet understand. Then I noticed something that made my stomach turn. One of the photos I had taken earlier in the evening, just after developing it, captured a man sitting on a bench reading a newspaper. The headline was innocuous, but in the background, obscured by shadows, the stranger's gaze was fixed directly on the man. His stance was deliberate, calculated. It wasn't random. I felt a sudden, cold understanding. This wasn't about me. He was documenting potential victims, and the camera, my camera, was his tool. The thought made my hands shake. Every frame I had captured, every click of the shutter, might have been a warning I had failed to interpret. I felt complicit in a pattern I didn't yet understand. The stranger's presence was more than observation. It was prediction, and I was unwittingly being drawn into his design. I tried confronting him once more in a narrow alley, my camera raised defensively. But when I came around the corner, he was gone. Only footprints remained, leading to a stairwell I knew led nowhere. It was impossible, infuriating, and terrifying. I realized then that I was being watched, manipulated, and trained to see events unfold in my own work without understanding the meaning until it was too late. Sleep no longer offered refuge. Every photograph became a potential message, every shadow a threat. I began developing roles obsessively, scanning each image with trembling hands. And finally, in one photograph taken just outside my own apartment, I saw him, closer than ever, with my own terrified reflection in the lens, as if warning me that the next frame, the next moment, would be mine. The next few nights I became a ghost in my own neighborhood. Every corner, every alley, every fire escape felt alive with him. I stopped going out during the day, stopped meeting friends, stopped leaving my apartment, except to photograph from a safe distance. And yet, he was always there, in the frame, in the shadows, just outside the reach of my lens. I began mapping his appearances, plotting where he was in each photo, noting the time of day, the angle, the background. Patterns emerged, subtle but undeniable. He was moving through the city like a predator, predictable in his precision, yet untouchable. I realized that my own obsessive documentation had made me part of his narrative. I wasn't just watching him. I was being watched through the lens, and every frame I captured became a prophecy I didn't understand until later. I started following him more directly, trailing him through abandoned warehouses, graffiti-strewn alleyways, and the rooftops of industrial buildings. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The adrenaline made me reckless, but I couldn't stop. I had to know. I had to understand. And that's when I saw him, standing over a scene I wasn't supposed to witness. A woman I knew, an acquaintance I had photographed months ago, was crouched on the ground, terrified. He was photographing her, capturing her fear, every detail of her vulnerability. My stomach dropped. He wasn't interested in me at all. He was using my work, my eyes, to identify and record his victims, learning from me, predicting movements, understanding what would happen before it did. I stumbled backward, dropping my camera. The sound made him turn slightly, but he didn't run. There was no malice in his face, only detachment, a cold, clinical awareness that made my skin crawl. In that moment, I realized I was next. All the warnings, the shadows in the background, the strange angles, I had ignored them. My lens had become a tool for him, and now I understood the horror fully. The next photograph, the next frame, would be mine. I returned home in a daze. Every photograph I had ever taken now felt like a confession, a record of crimes in which I had no part but could not prevent. My apartment became a cage. I checked every window, every door. I slept with one eye open, my camera clutched like a talisman, hoping to somehow control the chaos I had documented for years without realizing it. Days merged into nights. I became hyper-aware of every movement, every shadow. The city felt like a predator itself, each flickering street lamp a threat. And then, it happened. A photo I developed one morning made my blood run cold. The image was unmistakable. Me, framed in terror, pressed against a wall in my own apartment. My eyes were wide, my hands clutched at the edge of the frame. Behind me in shadow, he stood, calm and precise, documenting my fear as he had everyone else's. I panicked. I tried to flee, but I realized there was no escape. He knew my habits, my patterns, my fears. Every route I might take was anticipated. Every phone call, every alarm system, every attempt at intervention could be neutralized because he had studied me, just as I had studied the city. He was using my own skills against me, and I had no recourse. I contacted the police, but the report barely registered. "Someone stalking you? Through photographs?" the officer said, skepticism dripping from his voice. I tried showing him the prints, the evidence of my terror, the pattern of his appearances, but without catching him in the act, they could do nothing. I realized then that logic, evidence, and explanation meant nothing to someone who lived entirely in prediction and observation. The more I tried to resist, the closer he became. Each photograph I developed after that was a countdown, a warning I could not interpret fast enough. His presence was everywhere and yet nowhere. He didn't need to attack yet. He had already trapped me psychologically, made me complicit in my own fear, and turned my craft against me in a way I could neither undo nor escape. I began documenting myself obsessively, hoping to anticipate his next move. Every photo was a defensive maneuver, a desperate attempt to reclaim control, but the reality was stark. I had entered his frame. I was part of the story now, and the conclusion had already been written. My own camera, the tool of my passion, my livelihood, my art, was now a mirror reflecting the inevitability of my victimhood. I knew it was only a matter of time. Every photograph, every shadow, every faint click of a shutter had been a warning I refused to read properly. I barricaded my apartment the best I could, locks, chains, motion detectors, but deep down, I knew it didn't matter. He didn't need doors or walls. He needed me, my lens, my awareness, and my own instinct had already betrayed me. That night, rain pattered against the windows and the city smelled of asphalt and electricity. I set up my camera on the tripod, hoping to capture him in the act, to finally have proof. I waited for hours, staring at the dim room through the lens, watching for movement, listening for anything that might signal his arrival. My heart pounded with exhaustion and fear, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Then, in the faint glow of my desk lamp, I saw him. Not in the shadows, not just lurking in a frame, but in the room itself. His eyes, unnervingly calm, met mine across the lens. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every photograph I had ever taken, every shadow I had ignored, every moment I had dismissed as coincidence led to this. I raised my camera to my face, desperate to preserve proof, desperate to reclaim a shred of control. But when I looked through the viewfinder, the image developed before my eyes. Me, frozen in fear, pressed against the wall, my expression a perfect mirror of terror. The room behind me was empty, yet somehow he was already there in the frame, an omnipresent specter documenting my inevitability. Panic seized me. I ran through the apartment, trying doors, windows, even the fire escape. But each escape route seemed predetermined, each movement anticipated. He didn't chase. He observed, knowing I would corner myself, knowing my own fear would guide me to the perfect frame. Every shutter click I thought was my control was actually my submission. I was both witness and subject, trapped in a narrative I couldn't alter. The last photograph developed itself in my mind before I could even press the button. The stranger's silhouette filled the frame, my reflection central, terror etched in every line of my face. It wasn't just a photo, it was a statement, a culmination of every obsession, every lapse of attention, every ignored instinct. He had orchestrated it perfectly, and I had unwittingly played my role to the final second. The camera fell from my hands. Rain and darkness pooled against the edges of the room as I slumped to the floor. He didn't move, didn't need to. The last image was mine, and I realized I had been both artist and subject, hunter and prey, all along. My obsession with capturing life, my need to document and control, had blinded me to the most important truth. Sometimes, observation alone is not enough to save you. And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. Only the echo of his presence lingered, and the photograph on the screen, frozen and perfect, remained. In our pursuit of control and understanding, we often overlook the dangers inherent in obsession. Leo's story shows that vigilance without interpretation is not protection, and awareness without action can make us complicit in forces beyond our control. True safety lies not just in observation, but in humility, discernment, and heeding the warnings we so easily dismiss. I was born into a family that never quite fit together the way it should. Savannah's humid air had always felt like a memory pressing against my skin, sticky and insistent. My father was a man who wore charm like armor, the kind who could make anyone believe in his generosity while quietly demanding obedience. My mother, gentle and quiet, vanished when I was 12, leaving behind only a note that made no sense. Watch closely, Caroline. People are never what they seem. That note became my lens. I studied people like others studied books. In high school, I memorized body language, voice patterns, the way someone's eyes darted when lying. My friends called me observant. My enemies never knew I was always 3 steps ahead. As I grew older, I found an outlet for this curiosity in event planning. The art of orchestrating experiences, of creating spaces where people reveal their true selves, became my obsession. It wasn't about the parties themselves, it was about understanding behavior, testing boundaries, seeing how far people would bend before breaking. By November 2017, I had cultivated a reputation in Savannah's social circles as the flawless hostess, meticulous, polished, graceful. But behind the mask, I was always calculating. Weeks before the Marshfield estate masquerade, my sense of unease had spiked. My car was keyed one morning. A threatening phone call came through, dead silence punctuated by breathing. At first, I chalked it up to my imagination, remnants of childhood paranoia. But something deep in me knew. I needed control. I needed to turn observation into power. The Marshfield estate had stood abandoned for years, its grandeur fading but not its aura of intimidation. I had spent months researching every guest: politicians with skeletons in closets, investors skimming accounts, socialites with secrets darker than they let on. I memorized their routines, their preferences, even their weaknesses. Every note, every whisper, every subtle maneuver would be designed to expose truth, provoke tension, and measure reactions. The night arrived, fog rolling in from the Savannah River, curling around the mansion like a soft curtain. Guests arrived in elaborate masks, their faces painted with expectation. They smiled politely, unaware they were entering a carefully choreographed experiment. I greeted each one with charm and warmth, masking the anticipation roiling beneath my calm exterior. Champagne in hand, I watched from the grand staircase, cataloging every interaction, every glance, every slip of composure. It began quietly. A note left on a table, a whispered comment in the hallway, a rearranged seating chart. Small things, easy to dismiss. But they ignited sparks. I could feel the tension ripple through the room, subtle but undeniable. The masquerade was more than a party. It was a stage, and every guest, unwitting, had a role to play in my design. By midnight, the estate was alive with subtle chaos. I wandered among my carefully placed guests, a mask over my face, my eyes catching every flicker of discomfort. I overheard a senator arguing with his advisor over a financial misstatement, a young socialite's phone lighting up with revealing messages she hadn't intended anyone to see. I moved silently like a conductor, listening to the dissonance build. I approached Margaret Ellis, a prominent investor who had been boasting all night. "Did you ever consider that the numbers you flaunt might be overstated?" I asked softly, leaning close enough for her to catch my perfume. Her eyes widened slightly. The subtle alarm in her tone confirmed what I had predicted. It was thrilling. Just a few words, a few insinuations, and the first cracks began to show. Meanwhile, in the library, whispers of scandal began to spread. Alliances formed and broke apart within minutes. I lingered in shadowed corners, smiling faintly as my guests exposed themselves without realizing it. Every gesture, every expression, every secret glance was part of a larger mosaic I had orchestrated. People thought they were controlling their narratives. They were not. I was controlling them. And then, the final act approached. I signaled discreetly, ensuring my exit would go unnoticed until the culmination of chaos. I slipped through a hidden corridor, practiced and rehearsed for months, leaving only the faintest hint of my presence behind. A whisper in the ballroom, a shadow glimpsed from the grand staircase. From my vantage point in the hidden wing, I watched. The guests removed their masks, and the fragile illusions they had built for themselves shattered. Affairs were revealed, lies were exposed, and self-interest collided with guilt and fear. The room's atmosphere thickened with panic, suspicion, and humiliation. I had set the stage for a perfect storm, and I had withdrawn before the storm hit its peak. I remember the moment one of the guests, a young lawyer, realized what had happened. He looked around frantically, trying to find me, trying to locate the invisible hand guiding the night. Their eyes swept every corridor, every hallway, every darkened corner. They called for the estate staff, the authorities, but my presence was already gone, leaving only the traces of manipulation behind. I felt no guilt. This was not cruelty. It was demonstration. People believed they were sophisticated, untouchable, morally flexible. I proved they were fragile, and that even the tiniest nudge could send them toppling. I had witnessed the subtle collapse of the social facades I had studied for decades, and it was intoxicating. The city outside seemed quieter that night, as if Savannah itself held its breath, aware of the invisible forces at work inside the mansion. From my vantage point, hidden and observing, I cataloged every reaction, every emotional fracture, every whispered panic. Each detail would live with me, a record of human behavior stripped bare. As raw and telling as any photograph I could have taken, I lingered in the shadows until the first responders arrived. noting how they moved, how they asked questions, how easily they were misled. Every step of my plan had succeeded. The guests' confusion, the tension, the chaos, it was perfect. I had not touched a single person, yet I had wielded complete control over the evening. Days later, the story of the Marshfield Estate masquerade circulated through Savannah's gossip networks. Guests recounted the night with horror and fascination. Someone had to be behind it, they whispered. Investigators searched for evidence, scoured records, and interrogated staff. None of them could trace my hand. I was everywhere and nowhere. Friends called me, curious about the commotion. "Caroline, were you there the whole time?" they asked, unaware I had slipped away unnoticed. I smiled, letting them wonder, letting them think they might have glimpsed the architect, the mastermind, without ever realizing it. That was the power of subtlety, control without contact, influence without trace. I walked through Savannah a week later, among fog and gas lamps, watching people remember the night in fragmented recollections. They didn't know what they had been part of. They didn't know how closely I had studied them, how gently I had nudged their moral lines until they bent and cracked. And they would never know. Looking back, I understand now that the masquerade was more than entertainment. It was an experiment, a revelation, and a personal challenge. I had tested myself against the unpredictability of human behavior and emerged victorious. Not by force, not by intimidation, but by understanding, anticipation, and subtle manipulation. I learned that perception is fragile. People build walls of civility and morality, but all it takes is a whisper, a suggestion, or a shadowed glance to topple them. I had been shaped by my family's secrets, my mother's disappearance, and my father's control, and I turned those lessons into insight, into power. And for a brief, intoxicating night, I held the strings. Power is not always exercised through dominance. Subtle influence and understanding can shape outcomes more effectively. Observation, patience, and insight into human nature reveal that morality and self-perception are fragile. True mastery lies in knowing when to act, when to step back, and how small nudges can reveal the truths people most wish to hide. I've always lived in the spaces between sound and silence. Music wasn't just my passion, it was the language I trusted most. Growing up in Portland, Maine, my childhood was a rhythm of fear and escape. My father, once a promising pianist, had turned his disappointment into anger, often unleashing it on my mother and me. My mother tried to shield me, but I learned early to observe, to memorize patterns, to notice the subtle shifts in tone that signaled danger. Music became my sanctuary, the one thing no one could touch. By the time I turned 30, I was a high school music teacher, composing classical pieces late into the night, performing small recitals, and living in a modest apartment near the old Port District. Life was orderly, predictable, until the burglary. Nothing was stolen, but the rearranged sheet music and the scrawled note. "I hear you," unsettled me. The police shrugged it off, labeling it a prank. I didn't. Something or someone was observing me, and I felt the prickling awareness of being watched in every quiet moment. Weeks passed, and the anomalies began subtly. A piece I wrote one evening, gentle and introspective, seemed to echo in the real world. My neighbor's car alarm went off at the exact cadence of a staccato rhythm I had composed. A minor accident near the school mirrored the intervals of a melody I had just finalized. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence, a trick of imagination fueled by paranoia. But the incidents kept multiplying, each one unnervingly precise, until doubt and fear started gnawing at me during the day, and sleep became a fragile, interrupted dream. I started keeping a journal, documenting every unusual occurrence alongside my compositions. I double-checked street cameras, neighborhood reports, and social media posts, searching for an external cause. My obsession became all-consuming. By the time I noticed the small, windowless music studio across town, I was already trapped in a pattern I didn't understand, every step guided by invisible strings. The studio wasn't remarkable from the outside, just a flat brick building with peeling paint and a faded sign. But the minute I peeked inside through a cracked door, I felt it. Meticulous control. Cables snaked across the floor, microphones hung like sentinels, and screens flickered with spectrograms of sound. I realized with a cold shock that someone had been recording and analyzing my compositions. Every nuance, every pause, every harmonic choice. Victor Marlowe's name came up when I asked around locally. A recluse obsessed with music theory and psychological experimentation, he had vanished from public life years ago. And yet here he was, or had been, observing me, conditioning me in ways I could not yet understand. As the days passed, I noticed a compulsion in my work, small urges to play sequences I had no conscious reason to include. My fingers obeyed patterns I didn't intend, and the outcomes in the world seemed to follow with terrifying precision. I confronted myself in the mirror one night, whispering into the darkness, "Am I imagining this? Am I losing control?" But the proof was undeniable. Notes on the page corresponded with real-world events. I was both the composer and the instrument, acting as though my will were mine while something, or someone, was shaping it. I tried to stop composing, thinking it would break the cycle. But music called to me. My students needed me. The piano needed me. The melodies demanded form. Each piece I created carried hidden instructions, implanted by Victor's careful conditioning over years. Even my choices outside the studio, where to walk, whom to talk to, seemed influenced by the patterns I had internalized. I began documenting everything, photographing streets, recording sounds, writing notes in code. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized that I was ensnared in a network far beyond my perception. The culmination was a recital I arranged for a private audience. A test, I hoped, to reclaim control. Friends, students, strangers attended, each sitting silently, focused, unnervingly attentive. My hands trembled on the keys as I began a new composition. The notes rose, intricate and impossible to ignore, and the room reacted. Small tremors of emotion, subtle gestures, even whispers followed the rhythm I played. Panic set in. This wasn't music. It was a mechanism, a machine powered by Victor's manipulation and my unwitting participation. I realized too late that the recital was not a celebration. It was the execution of Victor's design. Every member of the audience was complicit, consciously or unconsciously. Each crescendo, each pause, each chord change had been crafted to elicit a specific response, leading me toward an action I could not resist. I felt my autonomy dissolve with every note. It was exhilarating and horrifying simultaneously, the realization that my passion, my identity, was a tool wielded by another. I confronted the studio's location again, desperate for answers, but it was gone, as if it had never existed. No records, no traces. Victor had vanished, leaving only the evidence of his manipulation. The patterns embedded in my music, the predictive incidents in the city, and the terrifying awareness that I had been complicit from the start. In the aftermath, life resumed in fractured pieces. I could still play the piano, but each note carries a shadow, a reminder of the invisible strings that once guided me. My students, my friends, the city itself, they were all part of a web I cannot untangle. The music I love has been weaponized against me, a mirror of obsession and control, revealing the fragility of autonomy. I learned to live cautiously, questioning every decision, every impulse. I compose for necessity, but each melody is tempered by awareness, a constant vigilance against the subtle manipulations that can infiltrate even the most intimate passions. I am both survivor and instrument, forever conscious that freedom is fragile, and that our creations, even those born from love, can be twisted into tools of control. Passion without reflection can be both a gift and a weapon. When we surrender our creativity or our choices to external forces, consciously or unconsciously, we risk losing autonomy. True freedom requires vigilance, self-awareness, and the courage to recognize when even our deepest joys might be exploited. I never imagined inheriting a bed and breakfast would change the rhythm of my life. The Willow Inn, tucked into the misty hills of Asheville, North Carolina, had been in my family for decades, but I'd spent most of my adult life documenting my travels, snapping photos, and writing blog posts for strangers scattered across the globe. My grandmother's sudden passing left me the inn almost by default, a responsibility that seemed both ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. As I stood on the front porch the first morning after moving in, the scent of damp leaves and old wood filled the air. The inn had its charm: creaking floorboards, floral wallpaper slightly faded by years of sun, and a staircase that curved in a way that made it feel like it was whispering secrets. I had spent years traveling, but never had I felt such a connection to a place, as though the walls themselves were alive and aware. The first week was ordinary enough. Guests checked in, I unpacked boxes, and I cataloged the inn's quirks: the slightly crooked windows, the faint drafts that seemed to carry voices when the wind blew. But then small things began to unsettle me. One morning, a teacup I swore I had left on the counter was missing, only to be found on the dining table. Notes appeared, tucked beneath mattresses, simple scribbles like, "Not everyone sleeps here willingly." I laughed it off at first. An old prank? My grandmother's eccentric handwriting? But the handwriting didn't match hers. I began keeping a journal, noting every anomaly: doors left unlocked despite my meticulous checks, objects slightly moved from where I had placed them, and faint sounds at odd hours. I tried to rationalize it. The inn was old. The stormy October nights played tricks on my senses, and exhaustion could easily distort perception. Yet, a creeping sense of unease refused to dissipate. On October 28th, a storm swept through Asheville, and the inn was almost empty. A man checked in late, calling himself Mr. Calloway, polite, measured, observant. He asked unusual questions about the layout of rooms, about the inn's history, and even about my grandmother's life. There was a weight to his gaze that unnerved me, an almost clinical curiosity that suggested he was cataloging every detail. I tried to smile, to maintain the role of hospitable innkeeper, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched more carefully than anyone else in the building. The storm raged through the night, thrashing the trees outside and shaking loose the old roof shingles. Sleep was fitful, every creak of the inn amplified. I kept telling myself it was just the wind, just my imagination, but the anomalies grew. A pair of gloves I knew I had placed in the laundry room appeared in Mr. Calloway's room. My laptop, left charging in the study, had moved to the sitting room. And then there were the notes, tiny scraps of paper in my handwriting, mentioning things I had no memory of writing. They described events that hadn't happened yet. I confronted myself in the mirror more than once, whispering questions I didn't want answers to. Am I losing it? Or is someone else here? The idea that Mr. Calloway might be more than he appeared, an intruder, a manipulator, someone observing me for reasons I couldn't fathom, gnawed at me. Yet I couldn't deny the possibility that I was imagining the entire scenario, letting fear warp reality. By the second night, I was hyper-aware of every sound: footsteps that weren't my own, doors clicking shut, faint whispers that seemed carried by the wind. I attempted to follow the source but found only empty hallways and shifting shadows. The inn's old architecture, once comforting, now felt labyrinthine, a trap designed to confuse and isolate. I tried to speak with Mr. Calloway during breakfast, to gauge whether he was aware of my unease. He smiled politely, a faint twitch of amusement in his eyes, and answered questions with deliberate vagueness. Every response seemed rehearsed, calculated, as if he anticipated exactly what I would ask. I began questioning my memory. Had I imagined things? Were the misplaced objects, the strange sounds, the notes in my handwriting all products of fatigue and isolation? When I checked the guest ledger, I noticed discrepancies. Rooms were listed that didn't exist, and reservations made by people I'd never seen. The storm's violence outside seemed to mirror the turbulence inside me. Every corner, every room, every shadow hinted at another presence, yet tangible proof remained elusive. I realized, with a shiver, that the storm wasn't the only thing I was weathering. Something, or someone, was testing the boundaries of my perception, and I couldn't tell if I was the observer or the observed. By the third night, the storm had slowed, but my unease had only deepened. I patrolled the inn in the dark, flashlight in hand, listening to creaking floors and distant gusts. Every shadow felt deliberate, as though someone, or something, was guiding my movements. I checked the guest rooms one by one. Everything appeared normal at first glance, but my instincts screamed otherwise. A faint smudge on the hallway mirror, a chair slightly rotated, the subtle scent of tobacco where I knew no one smoked. I tried confronting Mr. Calloway directly, voice steadier than I felt. "Do you mind if I ask why you're here?" I asked. He smiled, that same calm, precise smile, as if he'd been waiting for the question. "To appreciate the inn," he said softly. "It has history, character, stories waiting to be discovered. I'm just here. I wanted to press further to demand the truth, but a sudden draft blew through the hallway carrying the faint scent of old paper and something metallic, like blood. I froze. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I realized then that Mr. Calloway wasn't simply a guest. He wasn't merely observing. I was his subject. Every glance, every gesture I made seemed cataloged, analyzed. I began documenting everything in a notebook. Movements, sounds, objects displaced, anything unusual. It was the only way to convince myself I wasn't losing touch with reality. Then I found the first note that truly unsettled me. It wasn't hidden or cryptic. It was placed neatly on the reception desk. "You're doing exactly what I hoped you would. Keep looking, keep watching, keep thinking it's not you." I flipped it over. No signature, no handwriting I recognized, and a chill ran down my spine as I realized the handwriting wasn't mine. Someone else was here, playing me, making me doubt my senses, manipulating me while I thought I was in control. I spent hours checking the rooms, retracing my steps. Nothing concrete, no physical evidence, nothing tangible. But the inn itself felt different, almost alive. Corridors twisted in ways they hadn't before, the familiar rooms seeming unfamiliar. My journal entries and notes became a web of observations, questions and fears, a map of confusion and paranoia. And then I saw him. Mr. Calloway standing at the end of the hallway looking at me. Not in the polite way of a guest, but with the intensity of someone who knew everything. My pulse raced. I wanted to scream, to confront him, but the words froze. His eyes seemed to pierce through my own uncertainty, seeing not just my fear but my thoughts, my doubts, my secrets. It became clear, he wasn't the problem. I wasn't safe, not in my own mind. I had become part of someone else's experiment, or maybe my own unraveling. The storm outside seemed minor compared to the storm building inside me, where perception and reality collided, leaving me suspended between what was real and what was orchestrated. By the fourth day, exhaustion had become my constant companion. I slept little, ate less, and spent hours wandering the inn, examining every corner, every shadow. The notes had grown more insistent, more directed. One appeared on the edge of my bed. "You're closer than you realize," and yet, further from the truth than ever. I couldn't tell if it was a warning, a threat, or a taunt. I stared at the words for what felt like hours, trying to find a hidden meaning, a code, anything. My hands shook. Even my grandmother's old furniture seemed complicit, bearing silent witness to something I couldn't name. In my sleepless haze, I began replaying memories of past nights at the inn. The misplacements, the fleeting glimpses of shadows, the faint noises. I remembered doing things I had no memory of. Could I have moved objects? Written the notes? Had my mind fractured under the stress, or had someone manipulated me so completely that I could no longer distinguish my own actions from theirs? I confronted the empty halls again, calling out, "Who's here?" My voice echoed, absorbed by the thick walls. No response. But in the silence, I noticed something. The inn's layout, the rooms, the corridors, they seemed wrong. Subtle differences, like a mirror slightly warped. I had spent years in this building, yet now I felt lost in it, as if it were designed to confuse me, to make me doubt every step I took. Then I found Mr. Calloway's room. Empty, perfectly neat, untouched. Yet scattered across the desk were more notes. My handwriting again. Lines I didn't remember writing described events that had yet to happen, even referencing things from my journal. A wave of terror hit me. I realized the unthinkable. I had been writing them, or someone had forced me through fear and exhaustion to create a reality I didn't consciously understand. Panic set in. I tried to leave the inn, but the storm outside had made the roads impassable. My isolation was complete. I realized the truth slowly, like ice forming over a lake. I was both the observer and the observed, the manipulator and the manipulated, the guest and the intruder. The final night came quietly, almost sinister in its calm. The storm had passed, leaving behind a wet, heavy silence. I sat in the lobby, surrounded by the scattered notes, my journal, and the echoing emptiness of the inn. Everything pointed to the same terrifying conclusion. I could no longer trust myself. Every act of curiosity, every investigation, every attempt to expose a hidden presence had been my own creation, a projection of a part of me I had buried for years. The last note appeared on the front desk as I sat frozen. Some guests never leave, and some truths are better unseen. I stared at it for a long time, feeling the weight of every unnerving incident, every misplaced object, every cryptic note. The storm had ended, the roads would clear, and yet I couldn't leave. Not because of the weather, but because I understood the final, undeniable truth. I had orchestrated this entire haunting. My suppressed fear, my obsession with the unknown, my longing for drama. It had manifested in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. Mr. Calloway may never have existed. He might have been a shadow of my own mind, a reflection of my paranoia and suppressed memories. I left the inn the next morning, shutting the doors behind me, but the unease lingered. The Willow Inn remained standing, unchanged, yet it had changed me irrevocably. I realized that the greatest manipulator of all had been me, and that realization carried a weight I could not escape. I had hunted shadows, only to find that the most dangerous one lived within me. Reality is fragile, and the mind even more so. Curiosity unchecked, obsession unexamined, and fear unacknowledged can make us both the victim and the villain. True vigilance begins not outside ourselves, but within. The mind can be both sanctuary and prison. When obsession, fear, or unresolved trauma dictate our perception of reality, we risk becoming the architect of our own torment. The greatest mysteries are often within ourselves, and the truest danger lies in our inability to distinguish what we imagine from what exists.